Hey, good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome here. You guys are so beautiful. This is such a beautiful event. I know because Sarah and I connected a few years back, and I was part of the virtual event that we had during COVID when all you could do was virtual stuff. And I am just so thrilled to come here and be able to meet you in person. Whenever I've committed to doing an event like this, to speaking to a group of women especially, I spend the weeks prior just keeping that event in my heart and asking the Lord to tell me the message he wants you to hear. And I have no idea what it is, right? I mean, I'll make notes and I'll make plans, but God has a message for you here today. So I want to start out, first of all, by saying thank you for being here. Thank you for making the commitment to come here, because I know you're all busy women from all different walks of life. You've got a lot of things in your life that are vying for your time and your energy and your attention, and yet you still made the sacrifice of a Saturday to come together as women, as sisters in Christ, to affirm and encourage one another, to be fed yourself spiritually, emotionally, physically. It's important that we take this time, and I'm so encouraged to see that this great number of you have taken this time away. So I want to encourage you at the start of this, Caitlin mentioned that you probably have a lot of stuff in your life. You're probably burdened. We all are. We're all carrying things. You might have an issue in your marriage or financial troubles or work things or things with your kids or things with school, whatever you've got going on. I want to encourage you to think about what are the things that you're carrying with you today that are burdening you, that are weighing you down. And I want to encourage you to leave those things outside. Set them down. Do that for the Lord so that you can be opened up to receiving the message that he has for you to receive here today, so that you won't be distracted by those things. Set them down. Trust in the goodness of God. Trust that those things are going to be taken care of, whether you're fretting about them or distracted by them or not. Set them down outside. And I promise you, if when you're leaving here today, you want to pick them back up, you can. My prayer is, my hope is that you're going to have a renewed perspective and you're not going to want to do that, or you're going to do it in a different way. But I've been praying for you as I've been preparing to come here today. And so it's such a joy when I do that. Now I get to meet you, the people I've been praying for. What a gift that is. What a gift today is. I want you to make the most of it. We all have times in our life where maybe we need a little more quiet. We need a little more time for prayer, stillness, reflection, thinking and being present with the Lord. But we also have times in our lives where we need more connection. We need our sisters. We need to network with people. We need to share with one another. We need to be open. We need to be honest about some of the struggles. And we're going to talk about some of those things here today. So I'm going to just I just got to keep an eye on time. I will lose myself otherwise. But so I just want to encourage you to be open to that. Be open to what God wants to speak to your heart here today. What does he want to say to you? What is his unique message to you? And part of what I'm hoping he's going to affirm for you is just how beautiful and awesome you are. Now, I don't mean that like everybody's great, you're fantastic, you're perfect at everything. We all know that's not true. But God made you beautiful. Blessed and beautiful is the theme that we're focused on here today. And sometimes we might hear that and we might roll our eyes a little bit, because sometimes we feel anything but blessed and beautiful. And yet, St. John Paul II, any St. John Paul II fans here? Yes, thank you. Yeah, my husband calls him my boyfriend, and I do not correct him. Love that man. He's such a gift to the church, and he's a gift to the hearts of women everywhere, because he had this way of seeing us for who we are and affirming our dignity and our beauty and our blessedness, even in the messiness of the world. So he very famously wrote, necessary emphasis should be placed on the genius of women, not only by considering great and famous women of the past or present, but also those ordinary women who reveal the gift of their womanhood by placing themselves at the service of others in their everyday lives. Do you hear that? He's talking about you. The gift of service that you make of yourself to the people in your life. That's the genius of women. He goes on to say, for in giving themselves to others each day, women fulfill their deepest vocation, perhaps more than men. Women acknowledge the person because they see persons with their hearts. What a beautiful gift that is. See That's how I like to think about it. You are made to do it. And that doesn't necessarily mean raising children, although for many of us, that's how we live out a good portion of our motherhood. But it's in mothering. And what do I mean by that verb? What comes to mind when you think about mothering? It's this unique capacity we have as women for life-giving, self-giving, nurturing love. What a gift that is. And St. John Paul II said, every woman has that vocation. It's written on our hearts. Whether we live out that motherhood in physical ways, biological ways, spiritual ways, adoptive ways, it's this beautiful idea that we are made good and we are made for good. We are made to be a blessing to the people that God places in our lives because of our motherhood. So St. John Paul II says, motherhood is every woman's vocation. Yesterday, today, always. It is her eternal vocation. A mother is one who understands everything and embraces each of us with her heart. Today's world is hungrier than ever for that motherhood, which physically or spiritually is woman's vocation as it was Mary's. So he had the audacity to say that. You are made to mother. And if we're honest with ourselves, we know this is what we're made for. You could listen to the world, and there's nothing wrong with all of the accomplishments, the great things that we can do in the world. I'm not saying don't do those things, but let's not embrace that identity of in the workplace, or things we might do in social spheres, or things we might do to earn money or gain attention or the world's applause in various ways. Let's not sacrifice who we are for those things. Let's not sacrifice who God made us to be, what he made us to do, the gift that we're meant to be to the people that he places in our lives. So whether you're a single college student or you're a young mom or you're a grandmother, or you're an older woman who's never had biological children of your own, every one of us in a unique way is called to mother. And if you're wondering what that means for you right now, look around you. Who are the people that God has placed in your life for you to love with that unique capacity you have to love others? And so when we're looking at where we are as women today, we need to go all the way back to Genesis and find out, what is woman? What did God make us for, right? So we go all the way back to Genesis, and there we meet Eve, and we read, now the snake was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord had made. He asked the woman, did God really say that you shall not eat from any of the trees in the garden? And the woman answered the snake, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or even touch it, lest you die. But the snake said to the woman, you certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods who know good and evil. And Eve falls for this. And this honestly is the most basic core temptation we experience as human beings, but in a particular way, in a unique way as women, is not trusting in the goodness of God. Because you see, the serpent didn't say to Eve, hey, doesn't that fruit look delicious? Go on over and take a bite of it. No, what he said was, God's lying to you. He's keeping the good stuff for himself. You can't trust God. And that's the core of everything we might ever be tempted to do that is wrong. It's not trusting in the goodness of God. We begin to grasp at things. We think, God isn't good. He doesn't necessarily want good things for me. Think of Eve in the garden looking around and saying, oh, maybe God isn't good. Maybe he doesn't want good things for me. If I want good things, I need to take them for myself. And that's the core of every wrong thing we might ever do, and the way that we go astray, the way that we see ourselves through a glass darkly, is because we have this twisted vision of who we are and who God is. And these are the consequences of sin. And ultimately there in that story that we read in Genesis, God then outlines, Adam and Eve, they commit that first sin and they find themselves naked and ashamed and they know their sinfulness. This is not a happy time. And then God lays out the consequences of their sin. And he says to the woman, he said, I will intensify your toil in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your urge shall be for your husband and he shall rule over you. And then to the man, he said, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. And then he outlines all of these negative consequences of sin: death, sickness, work. In the end, he says, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This is a low moment in humanity when they're recognizing the consequences of their sin. When God is outlining it in that way, they are desolate and they are ashamed. They are sad. And one might think they're without hope in this moment of Genesis. But in that moment of sadness, of feeling alone, of feeling ashamed, broken and wounded, and facing these negative consequences, man is not without hope. It's very telling. After laying out all of these consequences of sin, the very next line that we read in Genesis is, the man gave his wife the name Eve because she was the mother of all the living. There in that moment of shame, of hopelessness otherwise, he sees hope. And where does he see that hope? He sees hope in woman. In his wife Eve, he sees hope for new life. He sees that in Eve, in woman. He calls her mother of all the living. And that's who you are. That's who we are. In our world today, we are facing everywhere. You don't have to go looking for it. The consequences of sin, the consequences of our woundedness, our brokenness. We live in a very fallen world. We're all coming up short. And yet here in this world of messiness and sin, our world too looks to us, looks to woman as a sign of hope. Because as St. John Paul II so beautifully describes, we have that gift of motherhood. Whatever that looks like for you in your life right now, I promise you, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, it's going to look different. But the gift doesn't change. The gift is that capacity, that unique capacity we have for self-giving, life-giving love. What a beautiful thing that we have that capacity. But then we get stuck in our sinfulness. The world might look to us as a sign of hope, but we feel like we're not up to the task. We're stuck in sin. And our culture even rejects this notion of motherhood being the most beautiful and dignified thing that we're called to, whatever that looks like. I mean by motherhood, all the ways that you're uniquely called to love people, see people with the eyes of your heart in the world today. Years ago, Natalie Portman, who's a famous Hollywood actress, she won an Academy Award, and she was very pregnant at the time that she was accepting this award. And as she accepted it, she had this beautiful line that she said. She thanked the father of her child, saying, "Thank you for giving me the greatest role I will ever play," meaning her motherhood. Thought it was a beautiful thing at the time. But the next day, she was raked over the coals by the press, because how dare she say motherhood is the greatest role she will ever play? How dare she, this accomplished actress winning an Academy Award, how dare she say that that's the most important thing she will ever do? And I don't know anything about Natalie Portman's faith life, but she knew it. It was written on her heart, the same way it is written on your heart, that motherhood is the most important thing you do. Seeing the other is the most important thing we do. And ultimately, when we forsake that, when we pursue other goals at the expense of who we are, it's us who pays the consequence. We're not happy. We think we want joy, and we think the way to find it is to follow the values of the world. And yet, it's truly in meaningful connection, in relationships with others, in pouring ourselves out as a gift to others, that we find meaning and purpose in life. This is what we're made for. This has meaning. And we know that. Ultimately, it's our own joy, our own happiness, our own cost of fulfillment that we pay that price when we suppress our natural inclinations to love and to serve and to put those things first in our life. So what do? First of all, I think we need to admit that we need each other. Thank goodness we have a day like today. We have other opportunities to connect with other women, to encourage and support each other, to remind each other of the gift that we are and that we're meant to be in the world. Do you know, ladies, that every one of us, every woman, has a primary need to communicate her thoughts and feelings to a non-judgmental listener? Do you further know that your husband is an unlikely candidate for this job? It's the truth. We love our husbands. They are great, but they are going to try to fix us, and we sometimes don't want that. We need a girlfriend. You need a girlfriend. You don't need 100 friends, but you do need a girlfriend. That's why my podcast is called Girlfriends, because it's all about connecting as women, about the real joys and the real challenges of daily living, being real about it, and understanding one another and not being alone in it. We need each other. We need to remind each other of these unique gifts we have as women. I'm going to talk about a few of them here today. So the 3 different feminine gifts I want to talk about today are the gifts of softness, sensitivity, and beauty. And now, these are just a few of the feminine gifts and strengths and virtues that we have. And I'm not going to describe them here today as every woman is like this, right? No. These are all expressed uniquely in each of us. And yet it is true about every one of us that we have these unique feminine gifts. The fact that we are male and that we are female matters. It's expressed in our bodies, but it's expressed physically and spiritually and emotionally. It's part of who we are. The world today will tell you that it doesn't matter and gender's a construct and, whatever the world is going to tell you, that's lies. It matters that we are female. It's an important part of our identity. It's an important part of how we know our purpose in the world, how God made us to be that gift to the people that he places in our lives. So let's talk about this strength of softness. So in St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body, I used to roll my eyes about theology of the body because I didn't quite get it. I was like, what? It's a little bit, it seemed a little bit off, like all this talk about sex and I don't know. But I ended up taking a few courses at the Theology of the Body Institute in Pennsylvania. And it really opened my eyes to just how beautiful these teachings are. And at the core of it, St. John Paul II is telling us that our physical selves are equally an expression of who we are spiritually. That matters too. Our physical selves matter. And the fact that our bodies physically are different from men's bodies matters. And it reflects a spiritual truth about who we are as women as well. So he said, the body and it alone is capable of making visible what is invisible, the spiritual and the divine. This is a beautiful thing to ponder. As much as we have a complicated relationship with our bodies sometimes, but our bodies as women are built to receive new life. This is a physical reality. Years ago, when my husband Dan and I were first married, soon after we were married, we went to a wedding. And as we're at the reception, Dan brought me over a glass of wine from the bar. And I remember he handed it to me and I looked at it and I thought, this is disgusting. I can't drink this. And I had no idea why I felt that way. And so I didn't drink the wine. And I was like, I don't know why I feel like I cannot, that's disgusting. And, a couple of weeks later, I take a positive pregnancy test, of course. And that's why, before I even knew I was pregnant, my body knew it and was changing my interaction with the world to protect and to nurture that new life within me. What a beautiful thing that is, that our bodies function in this way. Before a woman even knows she's pregnant, your body begins diverting nutrition and energy and resources to that new little life at the cost of the woman. We know this. Those of us who've been pregnant or have physically had children ourselves, we know this in a very personal way. But every woman's body is built differently from a man's body because it's built to receive and to nurture new life at the cost of ourselves. We give of ourselves to nurture life in others. That's such a beautiful gift. So we're created for communion. We're created for bonding with others. And our body is made for that too. Communion, our body is made to receive new life, nurture new life, whether you ever physically do that or not. That physical reality about a woman's body reflects a spiritual truth about who we are. We are made to receive others. We are made to be that gift to others. We are made to nurture life in other people. St. John Paul II says, the whole exterior of a woman's body, its particular look, the qualities that stand with the power of perennial attraction are in strict accordance with motherhood. Again, that capacity that we have for loving the other, for receiving the other. And this is all part of God's plan for helping us to see and express who we are as women. On average, the average woman's body has 10 to 15% more body fat than a man's. Yeah, sorry. This is the thing, right? That we're always fighting against, we're struggling against. Our culture tells us it's a bad thing. Yet this is how God made us. And this is that softness, right? And it's part of how God made us to receive other people. Think about the softness of a woman's hug or nurturing someone, holding them in your lap. Nobody wants to sit in grandma's lap because she's got rock hard abs. No. She's soft. She's welcoming. She's nurturing. Why do we fight against this? Why is it part of our culture in Hollywood and beyond, that ways that seep out to other parts of our culture? Why is it part of our culture that a woman, okay, fine, if you want to have children, fine, but make sure that a week and a half later it looks like you never had a child, right? Think about the insidious message that is for women in the world today. That you need to be something other than you are. To reject this idea of softness. And think about what a gift that is to other people in our life, to be soft. To be that, spiritually speaking, yes, physically, of course, that's part of the expression of it, but also emotionally and spiritually, to be a soft place for people to land. That they know they can trust you. They know you're going to see them with the eyes of your heart. They know they'll be understood. They know they'll be welcomed. We women have a great capacity for doing that. I saw this in a unique way when several years ago now, my young son, he was a teenager at the time, a fairly new driver, and I was out of town for work, and he knew this. I was several states away, and I was nervous that morning because I was giving a presentation to a board, and I was just so distracted with those things, and my son called me up out of the blue as I'm walking into this office, and he's like, "Mom, I got in a car accident." Yeah. And he's like, "I'm okay, but I totaled the truck." Okay. I was dealing with it and talking him through it. And, it wasn't until a while later that I was like, why did my son call me instead of his dad, who was 5 minutes away from where this took place? The owner of said truck. Yeah, well, because he knew I'd be a soft place to land. And we all have times in our life where we need that soft place to land. And more often than not, it's a woman who plays that role in our lives, who mothers us in that way. What a gift to be able to be that for the other people in our lives. It's a beautiful thing. And it's something that we need to be aware of so that we can nurture it in ourselves, because our culture, if we follow the messages of our culture, it will lead us away from that. It'll tell us, oh, you need to be a boss babe, right? You need to be tough. Well, that's not our natural inclination. How many times do you know, either personally or just looking at statistics, that women will make great advancements in the workplace and then leave it all because they want to have children or because they need to care for an aging parent, things that the world doesn't understand. And yet we know in our hearts this is the most important work we can do. All of those other things, we're actually amazing at them. Thanks be to God for the good things that women are accomplishing in the world of science and academics and in the boardroom. And we're needed in those places, but let's not be active in those places at the cost of who we are. Let's not pretend we're something other than we are to search out success in those places, because those places need our unique perspective as women. Those places need somebody who sees with the eyes of the heart, who is sensitive to the needs of others. And that's the next strength I want to talk about here, the strength of sensitivity. So when we talk about motherhood, you think about the classic image of a mother holding a baby in her arms, that classic image that we have. And yet that is a beautiful example of just the way that we connect with others, the way we bond with others. We're wired for relationship. We're wired for that connection. And that's why, when I said your husband's not a good candidate for that job, it's because he's wired in a different way. Men are wired differently. And yet we're focused on connection, relationship, bonding, feelings. We're sensitive to the needs of others. And truly, it's in being sensitive and giving of ourselves to other people. That's the most Christ-like thing we can do. We women do that in a way that men don't, and they cannot. It's different. They have a different vocation from us. Of course, we're all called to give of ourselves for others. And Jesus gives us the first and perfect example. So we're going to see in the coming week, in Holy Week, we follow him in his passion and his death as he hung dying and bleeding on the cross, pouring himself out of love for each of us personally. This is my body given up for you. We women have a unique way of doing that. Yes, physically through the example of pregnancy and physical motherhood, but spiritually, every woman has that calling of saying, this is my body given up for you. I give myself to you. And contrast that with what the world might tell you. You know, this is my body given up for you. What will the world say? My body, my choice. Right? Protect yourself. Focus on your rights. And there's nothing more anti-woman, anti-God, anti-love than that message. And that's a way that the enemy truly seeks to accomplish evil in the world today, is by attacking our gift of motherhood. Because like Adam knew in the Garden of Eden, woman is that sign of hope. And so if the enemy can attack woman and the way that we think about ourselves or what we think our goals ought to be in life, he can succeed. He can pull us away from that. He can make us embrace, just the most ridiculous anti-woman message possible, that we need to kill ourselves. We need to kill our motherhood. We need to squash that part of ourselves where we find true meaning and purpose. I mean, there's nothing more sexist in the world, ironically, than to tell a woman she needs to be something other than who she is. She needs to do something other than what she knows is the most important work that she's uniquely gifted at accomplishing in her life. She needs to do something other than that to be successful, to be worthy, to accomplish good things in the world. There's nothing more sexist than that. And, even just think about some of the iconic images of this my body, my choice, right? I always laugh when the idea of like burning bras, right? It's a funny thing, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's doing that anymore, but that's kind of like where this was founded, this idea of rejecting all these boundaries that society has placed on us. But I think there can be no more anti-woman image than that. Like I've told you, I've given birth to and nursed 8 children, and I believe I have earned a little bit of support. Yeah. Ain't nobody gonna take my bra. And let's remember that. So women are uniquely gifted at this art of relationship, of love. It's part of our feminine genius to make others feel seen and known and loved, to see the details of other people and to care about them, to care about their needs. As teachers of love, think about what a unique opportunity that is. If we have this unique capacity for seeing the other and learning how to love them, we're the teachers in our society, teaching other people what it means to love, how to love, and we do this every day. Think about Our Lady's example at the wedding at Cana. This is such a beautiful story to reflect on. Because, there in that moment, she saw they ran out of wine. Not a huge deal. It would be fine if she didn't say anything. But she saw and she cared that they would be embarrassed. And she wanted something to be done. And yet, she in that moment didn't go and tell Jesus exactly what to do, but she trusted that he would know what to do and that he would do it. And there in that moment, she goes to him and says, they're out of wine. They have no wine. And what does he say to her? He calls her woman. And now, so this is different culturally, right? I don't know about you, but if my teenage son calls me woman, he's gonna get grounded or something. But Jesus was saying this as an ultimate term of respect. Woman. He was recognizing the uniquely feminine role that Our Lady was playing there in that moment. Woman, what a gift you are. Because you're seeing the needs of others and bringing them to the Lord, seeing how they can be accomplished, sometimes working behind the scenes. I love that Our Lady is working behind the scenes here to get this done. And she doesn't have it all laid out. Sometimes we get caught up in this idea I can see the needs of others, but I can't fix them all. I can't solve all the problems of the world. I've got kids who are struggling. I've got a spouse who's struggling. I've got good friends who are struggling. Or I see even just in the world, it's falling apart. I can't fix it. But we can see those needs and we can connect with people in their needs, be sensitive to what they need. And sometimes we can work behind the scenes. We can figure out how to make these things work. You know, my mom, she raised 9 of us. And she's always, she's now 78 years old, grandmother of 43, great-grandmother of 16 and counting. Yeah, this love stuff is exponential. And, so my mom is like, she's from here. Well, not here, but she's from Canada. She grew up in Montreal. And she's about this tall. And she's just this beautiful example of this womanly gift because she's always aware of what everybody's going through. And she'll pick up on it if you're holding something back from her, right? And we have this gift. And sometimes it feels like a burden, and I know it is for my mom. Many sleepless nights just because we know what everybody's going through and we feel it and we see it. It's a burden to be so sensitive, and yet it's a gift. It's meant to be a gift. This is part of how God intends for us to bless the world. It's to be this gift working behind the scenes. And our world will really, dismiss sometimes this idea of making a gift for ourselves as something worthy, something valuable to do, because, it's not very glamorous. It's not very glamorous because oftentimes this kind of seeing the other and meeting the needs of the other, connecting, building relationship, building bonding, trust in relationships, it's made up of very small things. It's made up of like changing the sheets and wiping noses or making a casserole or folding laundry or cleaning or any of these thousands of unnoticed things that you do in your home. I was thinking about this the other day as I was filling the salt shakers. Nobody notices this stuff, right? Nobody notices. And so much of what we do, nobody notices unless it's not done, right? Nobody notices when you're keeping up the laundry, and yet they'll notice if it's not done. Nobody notices, this is the other one, of course. I know I'm in a room full of women, so I'm in a room full of experts on replacing the toilet paper roll. We are so good at that. And yet others in our family and our communities and our roommates, they lack that capacity for how to replace the toilet paper roll. It's all these little things, and it's not glamorous. And sometimes it's just noticing the needs of another and being there to listen. And there's not a lot to show for that after the fact. The world's not going to applaud your accomplishments in that. And sometimes the important work that we do, the good work that we do, is made up of what feels like 1,000 interruptions. We might think we're focused on good work, and yet we're interrupted, and we're interrupted, and we're interrupted. And that's not very glamorous either, and it doesn't feel very good because you feel like you're constantly distracted and pulled away. But we need to think again about how we approach our work and what is the important work that we do. There's a great book. It's now out of print, but I do recommend looking for a used copy and getting it. It's called The Church and the Culture War by Dr. Joyce Little. She talks a lot about this feminine capacity that we have and how much our culture and our church needs it, needs the unique way that we love as women. And she had this great, I'm going to read it for you here, this great paragraph where she talks about interruptions. And she says, what we fail to understand is that if interruptions are a waste of time, then Christ's life was a waste of time. For when we read the Gospels attentively, we discover that the story of his life is one long sequence of interruptions. The blind Bartimaeus interrupts his departure from Jericho. A woman interrupts his dinner in the home of Simon. A centurion interrupts his entry into Capernaum. Mary interrupts his enjoyment of the wedding. The list could go on, and one might even say that the crucifixion interrupts what could have been a splendid messianic career. Those were not interruptions, of course. Those were precisely the people he came to help, the things he came to do. With so much of his work consisted in attending to those who interrupted him, why should we suppose our lives to be any different? Allow yourself to be interrupted when you think you're doing important work. And again, I'm not dismissing that important work, because thanks be to God for the women who do that. And yet be open to the ways that God might be interrupting you with the needs of the people that he has put in your life for you to love and care for. And that's why it's important for us to come together as women and remind ourselves of the value and of the importance of these things, to focus on relationship. We need to affirm one another in choosing to value relationships over things, to value people over things, which is our natural inclination, but we can squash it if we listen to the world. You know, Mary gives us this beautiful example. Time and again, we read, so in Luke chapter 2, when we read about the nativity, think about this moment in salvation history where Jesus is born. It's this amazing thing. There are angels singing in the skies. She's holding this infant savior. And I don't know about you, but I would probably be freaking out just a little bit and thinking about like, okay, I gotta hold a press conference or something here, right? Like this is a big thing going on. And yet here in this moment, Mary doesn't do anything. So when you're tempted and distracted and think you need to be doing more than you're doing, think about Mary's example at the nativity, because this is the biggest thing that ever happened on earth. And she doesn't do a thing. She just holds Jesus. And we read in scripture, she kept all these things, reflecting on them in her heart. That's what we're called to do as well. Reflect on these things. Keeping them in our hearts. Keeping those things that we know are important. And we see that line again in scripture later when they find Jesus in the temple. They've been searching for him for days, right? This is always so frustrating to me when I read this, this beautiful mystery of the rosary. And to me, the greatest mystery is how could Jesus not know, right? That they would be anxious and they'd be looking for him. And he says, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Did you not know I would be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. There, even in this challenging circumstance, right? When he's like, "Did you not know?" I'd be like, "No, Jesus." Like, why was I searching for you? Are you kidding me? I remember several years ago, I had a teenage son at the time, my son Ambrose, and he was out with friends. And they had gone to like a haunted house or something in another town, which I was not that familiar with. So it was kind of on my radar, waiting for him to come home. And he didn't come home, and he didn't come home, and he didn't come home until he finally did at like 2 a.m. And I was a mess, right? I was so worried. I had called several people. I didn't know what was going on with him. And, he was so casual about it. He was like, "Oh, we had some car trouble." And I was like, "Well, just, your friend had a phone there. Like, didn't you think to call me? Tell me what was going on?" And he was like, "Oh, well, it wouldn't have gotten me home any sooner. So I figured," oh my gosh. So I can just imagine Mary's frustration here with Jesus saying, "Why were you searching for me? Like, didn't you know?" And yet here, he's divine. So this is different. Ambrose got grounded. But the point is the same. Mary, even in these challenging circumstances, even when she didn't understand, still she kept these things and treasured them in her heart because she knew their worth. She knew their value. And motherhood costs us. We talked about that in Genesis. We read that our Lord says, "You're going to bring forth children in great pain." Yes, of course, that's referring to labor pains, but it's also referring to the unique ways that motherhood in all of its forms costs us. This giving of ourselves to others costs us. Sometimes it's not reciprocated. Sometimes we don't see good fruit, even when we're pouring all of ourselves and all of our love and all of our work and all of our energy into relationships. Sometimes it doesn't turn out the way that we want it to. And sometimes we're tempted to be disappointed. And it's important to know that in those moments, we are vulnerable. We're vulnerable to starting to listen to those voices that tell us we're losers, that tell us we're failures. But it's in those moments that God is seeking to connect with you through that experience of motherhood that costs you. And he knows all about it. It's mentioned in that moment in the Garden of Eden in a specific way. You're going to bring forth children in great pain. bring forth new life in others in great pain. Suffering is part of it, and our Lord shows us that with his example as he hung dying, bleeding on the cross, pouring himself out in great pain for the life of others because he so loves others. And we as women have this unique capacity for mirroring that in much smaller ways, in imperfect ways in our human relationships, but in a way that's different from what men are called to do. So our motherhood costs us. It costs us physically, if you're physically bearing children, but more so emotionally and spiritually when we are loving other people in this capacity, when we are so aware of the needs of others and wanting to give of ourselves to bring that new life out in others. All right, then I want to talk a little bit about the strength of beauty. Beauty, we have such a complicated relationship with this idea of beauty because, the female body and the female spirit are uniquely beautiful. All the world knows this. Look at all of the history of art. The female form is so often the subject because we're beautiful. God made us beautiful. We're like the apex of God's creation. It's a beautiful responsibility we have as women. And yet, our culture doesn't quite get this right, do they? Even if they recognize it. Feminine beauty becomes a commodity, whether it's through, very obvious forms of prostitution or pornography, becomes something that's commodified. That's not God's plan for feminine beauty. Our beauty is meant to mirror the beauty of God. It's meant to point others toward God, to show others how beautiful God is. There's a difference between an icon and an idol. So an icon is something that points us toward God, right? Turns our hearts and our minds and our attention toward God. And that's what female beauty is meant to be. And that doesn't mean we're all supermodels. That's not the point, right? That's how culture gets it wrong by telling us we all need to look a certain way in order to be worthy. But female beauty is a gift to the world. And it's meant to be that icon, a reflection of the beauty of God, the beauty of God's creation in a unique way. And yet sometimes we'll turn it into this idol. Our culture certainly does that, which is something we put in the place of God, something we seek instead of God, something we set as a goal, an end in itself, beauty. And that's it, turning it into a God. But just think about the idea, the modern idea of beauty, and physical beauty especially, that we have such a complicated relationship with living in the culture that we do. Think about somebody like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, with her wrinkled face and how beautiful she is. And we know it. And even the world knew it. She was a celebrity because people were attracted to her because she just shined forth with that feminine beauty because she's a mother. She knew that role. She embraced that role. People saw that for the unique gift that it is and that it was. That's the beauty of woman. It's not about who's going on the cover of a magazine. You'd never see Mother Teresa of Calcutta on the cover of Vogue, right? It's not the look they're putting out there. And yet, she's beautiful. And we can see that. Have you ever known someone who's physically very attractive, but actually not a very attractive person? We all have examples of that we're aware of. And we know that what's really beautiful is who we are. And there's nothing more beautiful than a woman who knows who she is and embraces that role that God has given her as a mother, to mother as a verb, to love in a unique way the people that God has placed in her life for her to love. All right, I'm just going to quickly move through. I want to talk a little bit about sin, which, Holy Week's coming. We got to talk about sin. But, I want to talk about the way that we uniquely experience sin as women, because all sin comes with a sense of shame and guilt. And, people joke about and roll their eyes about Catholic guilt, but it's real. The world will tell you to laugh off the idea of sin, but we know in our hearts it's written on us, in us, to recognize when we've done wrong. And we need healing from that. And so, I know you have an opportunity to go to the sacrament of confession today. And I want to talk a little bit about that because we sometimes have a complicated relationship with even the sacrament that we know is made for us to be healed, to be freed from the slavery of our sin. And when we talk about sin, especially as women, I like to look at that gospel passage about the woman who was caught in adultery. Such a famous passage, right? Such a dramatic story in the Gospels. This woman where the Pharisees take her and they throw her at Jesus' feet and the people are surrounding her to stone her. Imagine how vulnerable this woman was here. And side note, adultery isn't a sin you commit by yourself. Where was the man? He's not there. She was used in whatever capacity in that relationship with that man. And now here she is being used by the Pharisees because they don't really care about stoning this woman. They want to trip Jesus up. They want to get him to say something that's going to make him unpopular and trip him up. So they're using this woman in this way, and they throw her at his feet. And you know what? That's where every one of us finds ourselves when we're mired in our own sinfulness. We're thrown at Jesus' feet, and sometimes it's because of our own sinfulness. Sometimes it's because of the sinful choices of others. But we all have times in our life when we are vulnerable in that way, when we find ourselves thrown at Jesus' feet, and we might not know that's where we are. But in those moments in your life where you feel thrown, where you feel helpless and hopeless, I want you to remember that woman in this gospel story, because what did she need to do in that moment? She didn't know where she was. She thought she was about to be stoned to death. She thought she had no hope, but she needed only to look up because Jesus was standing there. And the same is true for us in our moments of sin, in our moments of sinfulness. We need only look up because he's there with us. And it's through that sacrament. The sacrament is made for us. It's a great gift to us. And as part of the sacrament, we have to say out loud those things we've done wrong. And that is uncomfortable. We don't like to do that. But we don't need to do that because God needs us to do that. He doesn't need anything. And he certainly doesn't need us to say out loud the things we've done wrong. He knows all about it. He was there. And yet we need to do it. It is part of our healing to say out loud, these things are wrong, and I need the healing that can only come from Jesus Christ. That's what we say. That's what we do in the sacrament. And yet sometimes we'll hide from that. Jesus is the divine physician, and we forget that because if you went to the doctor with a festering wound that was infected on your arm, you would show him the festering wound that's infected on your arm, no matter how gross it was, so that he could heal you. How many times do we have this wound in ourselves that we're unwilling to show to Jesus? We think we have to put it all together ourselves before we approach him. He wants to heal us. He wants to make us whole. He wants to free us from sin. And yet we don't want to show him that because I get it. We're ashamed. It's embarrassing. This is garbage, right? There was one time, my husband surprised me by taking me away for the weekend to this, we went to Boston and we stayed in this fancy hotel. And at the end of the weekend, we were waiting at the front of the hotel for the valet to bring our car around. And when he did, the doorman went over and opened the passenger door for me. It was like this elegant moment, right? And a bunch of garbage fell out of the passenger seat, right? There it was. Okay. And I was so embarrassed, right? And the doorman's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me pick this up for you." And I was like, "No." And I'm standing physically on the streets of Boston between this doorman and my garbage. I was like, "You're not touching my garbage." Right? And that really stuck with me because that's how we approach the sacrament sometimes. We're like, "I can't show this to you, Lord. This is my garbage." And yet Jesus wants us to bring him our garbage. Let him touch you in the sacrament. Let him heal you. There's a beautiful phrase in the 12-step program that says, "You're only as sick as your secrets." I think that's so powerful because it is so true. So true. You're only as sick as your secrets. We need to lay these things bare so that we can be healed. Sunlight is a natural sanitizer. It naturally kills harmful bacteria to put something out in the sun. This is a truth about us spiritually as well. We need to lay bare those things, as uncomfortable as it is. Bring your garbage to Jesus. Allow him to touch you. Allow him to heal you. Allow him to make you whole. Okay, so I'm not sharing these ideas of womanhood here today, like I said at the start, to say, here's a box. It's called womanhood. Make yourself fit in it. That's not it. That's not how God makes us as women. To be a woman is to be expansive. The idea of womanhood is expansive. It's as varied as the people here present. It's as varied as the number of women in the world, in the history of the world. So you have your own unique perspective, your own unique experience of womanhood. What I want to encourage you here today is to think about some of these gifts. Yes, the gift of softness, of sensitivity, of beauty. But beyond that, how do you have those gifts in your life? Where is God calling you to use those gifts to love and serve the people that he's placed in your life, whoever they may be? And we need to accept where we are. We're seeing ourselves through a glass darkly. It's warped. It's a warped vision. We need to understand that. And I want you to take the opportunity here today, spend some time in prayer, asking our Lord to show you who he's calling you to mother, how you are called to be a mother right now. Who are the people he's placed in your life for you to love and to serve with your unique capacity of life-giving, self-giving, nurturing love, that motherhood, which the world is hungry for. And remember, the world will tell you to settle for less than that. I want to encourage you not to settle. And St. John Paul II will encourage you not to settle. He said famously, do not be afraid. Do not be satisfied with mediocrity. And to buy into the world's goals for you as a woman is to be satisfied with mediocrity. It's to deny who God made you to be and the real greatness, whether the world ever sees it and applauds it or not, that God calls you to in your own unique mission, your own unique vocation as a woman in the world. So none of us is going to feel like a natural at it. We're all going to struggle sometimes, but that's why it is good that we are here. And I encourage you to think about the ways that God has placed other women in your life as a gift and the ways that you can be a gift to other women, to encourage and support and affirm them in these uniquely feminine gifts that we have. Let's find out what God has planned for us. Let's find out the great good work that he wants to achieve in us, if only we will open ourselves up to embracing it. Thank you so much.